There's a lunch pail sitting in a storage room right now. It has been for 135 years. And if you touch it, your fingers will go numb from the cold. Not cool, I mean lifeless. The kind of cold that shouldn't exist in a climate-controlled archive. The pail belongs to a man named Thomas Reese. His initials are scratched into the tin, crude and hurried, probably done with a nail. TR inside, wrapped in wax paper that's gone brittle and yellow with age, is a Cornish pasty, beef, potato, turnip. His wife Catherine made it before dawn on March the 2nd, 1890, while Thomas dressed for his shift in the dark so he wouldn't wake their daughter. Thomas never came back up to eat it. Neither did 47 other men that day. Now, before you think you know where this is going, some tragic mining disaster, cave-in, explosion, the kind of story that's been told 1,000 times, let me stop you right there. Because this isn't that kind of story. The mine inspector's report, sealed for 3 decades before anyone outside the government could read it, doesn't mention the explosion, doesn't mention collapse. What it does mention, well, we'll get there. First, I need you to understand something about that lunch pail, about what it meant. In 1890, a coal miner's lunch pail wasn't just a container, it was an investment. The good ones, dome-top tin with a wire handle, 3 separate compartments stacked like a tower, cost 25 cents. That was nearly half a day's wages for a man working underground. You didn't buy one lightly, and you sure as hell didn't lose it. Thomas's pail was a Lisk model. You can still see the maker's stamp on the bottom, worn smooth from years of being set down on tunnel floors, on cart beds, on the wooden benches where men sat in the dark, eating their midday meal by carbide lamplight. The pail had 3 sections. Bottom tier, your main meal, usually a pasty or thick sandwich. Middle tier, tea or water, kept separate so it wouldn't make the food soggy. Top tier, a spare candle, maybe a twist of tobacco if you could afford it, a fork if you were fancy enough to use one. When full, these pails weighed 3, maybe 4 pounds. Doesn't sound like much until you're carrying it on your belt for a quarter-mile walk through a tunnel so low you have to stoop, then down a ladder 300 feet into the earth. Every ounce matters down there. Every single thing you bring underground has to earn its place. The pasty Thomas's wife packed that morning definitely earned its place. If you've never had a proper Cornish pasty, it's hard to explain what they meant to mining families. This wasn't just food, it was engineering. Thick pastry crust, crimped along one edge in a rope pattern, sealed tight so nothing leaked out. Inside, chunks of beef if you could afford it, though more often it was just potato, rutabaga, and onion. The genius was in how it was built. That thick crust? It was insulation. A pasty would stay warm for 8, even 10 hours underground. And that crimped edge wasn't decoration. That was your handle. See, when you're working with coal, your hands get filthy. Coal dust works into every crack in your skin, under your nails, into the creases of your palms. And coal in the 1890s was particularly nasty, full of arsenic from the rock around it. You couldn't just wash it off with a rag. It stained everything it touched. So, miners would hold their pasties by that crimped edge, eat from the opposite end, working their way across. And when they got down to that last inch of crust, the part their dirty hands had been gripping, they'd toss it aside, throw it into the corner of whatever chamber they were working in. The official reason? Arsenic contamination. It made perfect sense. But ask the Cornish miners, the Welsh, the men who'd been working underground for generations, and they'd tell you something different. They'd tell you that the last bit of crust wasn't discarded, it was left for the knockers. We'll come back to that. What you need to picture is this. March 2nd, 1890, about 5:30 in the morning, still dark. Krebs Mine Number 11, Indian Territory, what we call Oklahoma now. 48 men gathering at the pit head, their breath steaming in the cold air, each one carrying a lunch pail. You could hear those pails from 100 yards away. The clank of tin on tin as men walked, the rattle of forks and spoons inside, the slosh of tea in the middle compartments. It was its own kind of music, that sound, the sound of men going to work. Catherine Reese had gotten up at 4 to make Thomas's pasty. She did it in the dark too, by feel more than sight. She'd made so many she could do it blind. Roll out the lard crust pastry on the kitchen table, still warm from sitting near the stove overnight. Dice the beef small, because big chunks meant the pasty wouldn't cook evenly. Mix it with potato, turnip, and onion, season with salt and pepper, if you have it. Fold the pastry over, crimp it tight. Carve her initials in the top corner, C.R. Her initials, not his. That way, if the lunch pails got mixed up, and they did, often, in the chaos of the meal break, Thomas would know which one was his, which one had been made by his wife's hands, packed with her care. The pasty went into the bottom tier of the pail while it was still warm. Tea in the middle, brewed strong and sweet. Thomas's spare candle in the top, and a photograph. Catherine and their daughter, cut from a tintype and wrapped in oilcloth so the damp wouldn't ruin it. That pail rode down the shaft with Thomas that morning, 350 feet down, straight into the earth, with 47 other men and 47 other pails. The cage that lowered them creaked and swayed on its cables, and the sound of all those lunch pails clanking together echoed in the shaft like bells. Like church bells, some men said later, like a funeral toll. The smell down there was particular. Coal dust? Yes, that sharp mineral bite that gets into your nose and stays there. But also the smell of men, of sweat and tobacco and the lard from the pasties warming in the heat of their bodies. The smell of lamp oil and the carbide they used in their headlamps. The smell of earth, old and dense and somehow alive. And underneath it all, just barely noticeable, the cold. Now, that shouldn't have been there. 300 feet down, mines are warmer than the surface. The Earth's heat rises, gets trapped in the tunnels. Most mines run about 55, 60 degrees year-round. Comfortable, almost. Men worked in shirt sleeves down there. But that morning, March the 2nd, the men who came back up, all 3 of them, said the cold hit them the moment they stepped off the cage. Not cool. Cold. The kind that makes your breath steam and your joints ache. One of them, a Welsh miner named Evan Trelawney, said it reminded him of something. He said it felt like the cold you get in old mines. The ones that have been sealed up for years. The ones where something's been sitting in the dark, waiting. The ones where the knockers live. 48 lunch pails went down that morning. 3 came back up. The other 45 are still in storage at the Oklahoma Historical Society. They moved them from the recorder's office in 1962 when the county building was being renovated. The archivist who handled the transfer said something odd about them, said they felt wrong. Too light, he said, too empty, like they were missing something more than just food. Every single pail was empty when they came back up. The food was gone, the tea was gone, even the spare candles in the top tiers, gone. Just empty tin compartments, still latched shut, still locked. Thomas's pail still has Catherine's pasty in it, though, still wrapped in that wax paper, still showing the marks of her fingers in the dough where she crimped it. Because Thomas never made it to the meal break that day, neither did the others. They disappeared, and I mean that literally disappeared, at 9:47 that morning, about 3 hours into their shift. The mine company said there was an explosion. The newspapers said cave-in. The families held funerals for men whose bodies were never found, and buried empty coffins because they needed something to bury, something to grieve over. But the mine inspector, a man named William Crawford, who'd been investigating mining accidents for 20 years, who'd seen explosions and floods and every kind of disaster you can imagine, he wrote something different in his report, something that made the territorial governor seal it away for 30 years. He wrote, "The disappearance cannot be explained by known geological or mining phenomena." And in the margins, in handwriting that gets shakier as you read down the page, he wrote something else, something that wasn't supposed to be there, something he crossed out but didn't cross out hard enough. They were taken. Taken by what? Taken where? That's what we're going to find out. But first, you need to understand what those men had for lunch, because that detail, that seemingly insignificant detail about pasties and lunch pails and crimped crusts, that's where this whole thing starts to unravel. Thomas Reese had been down in mines for 16 years, and he'd learned to trust his gut. That morning, March 2nd, 1890, his gut was telling him something was off. He couldn't put his finger on it. Nothing obvious, just a feeling, like when you walk into your house and can't shake the sense that someone's been there while you were gone, even though nothing's out of place. He stood at the pit head of Krebs Mine Number 11, lunch pail hanging from his belt, and watched the sky lighten from black to that particular shade of gray that means dawn's coming, but isn't here yet. Around him, 47 other men were doing the same thing they did every morning, checking their lamps, adjusting their belts, sharing tobacco, complaining about wives and weather and wages. Normal. Everything was completely normal. So, why did his hands feel cold? Krebs Number 11 was what you'd call a productive mine. Not the biggest in Indian Territory. That honor went to Number 9, 2 miles east, but solid, reliable. The Osage Coal and Mining Company pulled 800 tons a day out of her, good bituminous coal that burned clean and hot. The seam ran deep, 427 feet down, but it was thick and mostly horizontal once you got there. Easy working, the bosses said. Good coal, good money. The men knew better than to trust words like easy when you're talking about mines. The workforce was the usual mix you'd find in coal country back then. Cornish men who'd grown up in tin mines and knew rock like other men knew their own children. Welsh miners from Pennsylvania and West Virginia following the seams west as the eastern mines played out. Italians, newer to American mining, but not to the work. Many of them had come from sulfur mines in Sicily, places so hot and toxic that Oklahoma coal mines felt like vacation by comparison. They were good at what they did. That's important to understand. These weren't desperate men taking foolish chances. They were professionals. Thomas was Welsh, from a family that had been mining since before anyone could remember. His father had worked the anthracite in Pennsylvania until a roof collapse crushed his legs in '79. Thomas had been there when it happened, 17 years old, heard his father screaming 3 chambers away. He'd learned that day to read the little signs, the tiny warnings the earth gives you before it decides to kill you. He'd survived 2 collapses since then, once in West Virginia, once here in Oklahoma. Both times he'd gotten out because he'd noticed something small, a change in the air pressure, a shift in the sound of the timbers, and moved before anyone else thought to. So when Thomas Reese felt uneasy, men paid attention. "You feel it too?" The voice belonged to Evan Trelawney, standing beside him at the cage platform. Evan was Cornish, 41 years old, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from the same granite his ancestors had mined back. In Cornwall, 3rd-generation miner. His grandfather had worked the tin deposits near Redruth, his father the copper mines in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Evan had stories about both of them, stories about things they'd seen underground, things that couldn't be explained, things like the knockers. "Feel what?" Thomas asked, though he knew exactly what Evan meant. The quiet. And there it was, the thing Thomas's gut had been trying to tell him. The mine was quiet. Now, if you've never worked underground, you might think quiet is good, peaceful even. But mines are never quiet. There's always sound, water dripping through fissures in the rock, timbers creaking as they settle, the distant percussion of picks hitting coal, the rumble of carts on rails, the breathing of the earth itself as temperature changes make the stone expand and contract. Silence in a mine means something's wrong. "Been like this since I got here," Evan said quietly, his Cornish accent making the words sound almost musical. "No dripping, no settling. Even the birds aren't singing up top." Thomas looked around. Evan was right. You could usually hear mourning doves this time of morning, their calls echoing across the scrubland. Nothing. "Weather change is coming," Thomas said, not believing it himself. "Maybe?" Evan pulled out his lunch pail, checked the top compartment. Inside was his spare candle and something else, a small cloth bundle. He unwrapped it enough for Thomas to see, the crimped crust from yesterday's pasty, saved overnight. "But I'm leaving double today, just the same." Thomas knew what that meant. In Cornish tradition, you left the crust of your pasty for the Tommyknockers, the small folk who lived in the deep places, who warned miners of danger with their knocking, who led you to good ore veins if they liked you and caused cave-ins if they didn't. Most miners had heard of them. The Cornish ones believed in them absolutely. "The knocking stopped," Evan said, even quieter now. 3 weeks they've been knocking in the north section. Every shift, regular as clockwork. 27 seconds between knocks. I timed it. Then yesterday, around midday, nothing. Haven't heard from them since. The geological survey said it was rock settling, Thomas offered. Evan's laugh was harsh and brief. "Aye, they did. And when rock stops settling, what's that mean? Do you figure?" Before Thomas could answer, a third man joined them. Giovanni Marconi, John, most people called him, because Giovanni had too many syllables for American tongues. He was 28, built like a barrel, with the kind of hands that could crack walnuts without thinking about it. He'd come over from Sicily 6 years ago, worked sulfur mines there since he was 12. The sulfur work had scarred his lungs. You could hear the wheeze when he breathed hard. But he needed the money, had a wife and 3 children in a company house another baby on the way. "Buongiorno," he said, then caught himself. "Good morning. Will we go down soon?" "Any minute," Thomas said. "How's Maria?" "Big." Giovanni smiled, the kind of tired, proud smile every expectant father wears. "Baby comes in maybe 2 weeks. She made me promise. Be careful today." He tapped the top of his lunch pail, and Thomas heard the clink of metal. Giovanni kept a St. Barbara medal in there, patron saint of miners, of anyone who worked with explosives or in dangerous trades. It wasn't much bigger than a silver dollar, but Giovanni never went underground without it. "Does she say anything else?" Evan asked. Giovanni's smile faded a little. "She says she has a bad dream, about me in the dark, about—" he struggled for the English words, "about small hands, pulling." The 3 men stood in silence for a moment. Then the 5:30 whistle blew, sharp and loud, and the mine boss's voice cut through the gray morning. "Right then, listen up." James Sullivan was a big man, had to be, to keep order among miners who spent their days swinging picks and hauling coal. Irish, with red hair going gray, and a nose that had been broken at least 3 times. He'd been mine boss at Krebs 11 for 7 years, and before that, he'd worked as a foreman in Pennsylvania. Knew his business, knew coal, knew men. He also knew when men were spooked. "I'm hearing talk," Sullivan said, loud enough for all 48 men to hear. "Talk about quiet. Talk about feelings. Talk about bloody Tommy knockers." A few nervous laughs. Not many. "Here's what I know," Sullivan continued. "Coal doesn't mine itself. The company's paying us to pull 800 tons today, and that's what we're going to do. Geology fellows checked the north section last week, solid as a church. No gas pockets, no water, no instability. Just good coal waiting to be dug." He looked directly at Evan. "And if rock was settling before, and it's not settling now, that means it's done settling, which means it's more stable, not less. You follow?" "With respect, boss," Evan said, and Thomas heard the tension in his voice. "My grandfather always said—" "Your grandfather mined tin in Cornwall," Sullivan interrupted. "Different rock, different conditions, different everything. This is coal, Trelawney, American coal, and we're on a schedule." Sullivan pulled out his watch, checked it against the pithead clock. "First cage loads in 5 minutes. Thomas, you're taking your crew to North Section. We're opening that new chamber today. Should be a rich seam if the surveyors were right. 12 men with you?" Thomas felt his stomach drop. "North Section's been quiet, boss. Maybe we should dig where the coal is," Sullivan said flatly. "You've got a problem with that?" What could Thomas say? He had a wife, a daughter, rent to pay, food to buy. You didn't keep your job by arguing with the mine boss about feelings. "No problem," he said. Evan stepped forward. "Boss, I'm asking. Don't send me to the North Section today. Send me anywhere else. I'll work a double shift in the South Galleries. You'll go where you're assigned," Sullivan said. But there was something in his face, not quite sympathy, but close. "Look, Trelawney, I understand you've got your beliefs. I respect that, but I've got quotas to meet, and the North Section needs experienced men. You're one of my best. I need you there." Evan looked at Thomas, then at Giovanni. His jaw was tight. "I'll go," he finally said, "but I'm leaving my crust. All of it. In the northwest corner, where the new chamber meets the old tunnel." "You leave whatever you want," Sullivan said. "Just make sure you're pulling coal while you do it." The cage that took them down was iron mesh just sturdy enough to hold 12 men and their gear. You could see through the sides, watch the shaft walls slide past, rough-cut rock at first, then timbered sections, then solid coal seam. The cables creaked and sang above them, a sound every miner knew like his own. Heartbeat. Thomas stood pressed against the side, his lunch pail digging into his hip. The descent took 3 minutes, but it felt longer. The temperature changed as they dropped, starting at maybe 45 degrees on the surface, warming to 58 by the time they reached bottom. The air got thicker too, pressing against your ears until they popped. But something was different today. Halfway down, Thomas noticed his breath was fogging. At depth, your breath shouldn't fog. Too warm for that. He looked at Evan and saw the same realization in his eyes. The cage hit bottom with a clang. The gate swung open. Before them stretched the main tunnel of Krebs 11, carved from solid coal, reinforced with timber every 10 feet, lit by lamps hung on hooks. The tunnel floor was worn smooth from years of cartwheels and boot leather. Rails ran down the center, leading deeper into the earth. Normally, you'd hear the sound of the mine coming alive, men calling to each other, picks biting into coal, mules huffing as they pulled carts, water dripping somewhere in the distance. Today, nothing. Giovanni crossed himself. Thomas saw his lips moving in what might have been prayer. "Well," Sullivan's voice echoed from the cage above them, already heading back up for the next load. "Are you going to stand there all day, or are you going to earn your wages?" Thomas touched his lunch pail, felt the cold tin against his palm through his glove. "Let's go," he said. They walked into the darkness, 12 men with 12 lunch pails heading for the north section. It was 6:15 in the morning. In 3.5 hours, 45 of them would be gone. By 7:15, all 48 men were at their assigned positions. Thomas's crew had reached the north section, the deepest part of the mine, where a new chamber was being opened into what the surveyors promised was a thick, clean seam. By 8:30, the men had set down their lunch pails in their usual spots, ready for the midday break. Thomas placed his in the small alcove where he always left it, next to a timber support marked with his initials. Giovanni set him beside a water barrel. Evan walked all the way to the northwest corner of the new chamber and carefully placed it there, along with both crusts from his pasty, the one from today and the one he'd saved from yesterday. For luck, he said to no one in particular. At 9:47 a.m., something happened. The mine inspector, William Crawford, would spend 2 weeks trying to describe it in his report. He would interview the 3 survivors multiple times. He would examine the physical evidence, consult with geologists, and bring in experts from as far as Pennsylvania. And in the end, the only words he could find were these: the disappearance of 45 men from the north section of Krebs Mine Number 11 cannot be explained by explosion, structural collapse, or any known gas event. All physical evidence suggests the men simply ceased to exist at their work stations. This investigator finds no precedent for such an occurrence in mining history. And in the margin, in handwriting that grew shakier with each word: unexplained disappearance, no bodies recovered, no sounds heard, as if the earth simply swallowed them. But that's not quite accurate, because the earth didn't swallow them. Something else did. Before we go any further, you need to understand something. The Tommy Knockers weren't just a story miners told to scare greenhorns. They were a belief system, a religion almost. And like most religions, they had rules. The Cornish miners who came to America in the 1820s, fleeing the collapse of tin mining back home, looking for work in Pennsylvania coal country, they brought the knockers with them the same way they brought their pasty recipes and their hymns. It wasn't optional, it was part of who they were. They described them as small figures, maybe 2 feet tall, dressed in miniature versions of miners' clothing, leather caps, canvas trousers, tiny boots. Some said they looked like old men, wizened and ancient. Others said you couldn't quite see their faces, like your eyes just slid off them when you tried to focus. What everyone agreed on, they lived in deep places, the abandoned tunnels, the worked-out seams, the parts of the mine where men no longer went. And they knocked. 3 knocks, always 3, warning of cave-ins, guiding you toward rich ore, sometimes helping, sometimes hindering, always watching. And if you wanted their favor, or at least wanted them to leave you alone, you followed the rules. Rule 1, always leave them the crust of your pasty, not throw it away. Leave it, deliberately, as an offering. Rule 2, never whistle underground. Whistling attracted their attention, and their attention wasn't always benign. Rule 3, never speak ill of them while you're in their domain. Badmouth a knocker at the surface. That was your business. Do it underground, where they could hear you. That was asking for trouble. Rule 4, if you hear 3 knocks and you're alone, leave immediately. No questions, no hesitation, just go. Most American miners, the ones who weren't Cornish, thought it was superstitious nonsense, old world foolishness, the kind of thing you left behind when you crossed the Atlantic. But here's the thing about superstitions. They usually start because something happened, something real, something that needed explaining, even if the explanation didn't make sense. And at Krebs Mine Number 11, things had been happening for over a year. January 1889, 14 months before Thomas Rees and his crew descended into the north section. A miner named Patrick Doyle, Irish, 26 years old, worked at Krebs 11 for 3 years, was checking an abandoned side tunnel for usable timber when he saw something that made him drop his lamp. He described it to the other miners that night, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold his whiskey. A small figure, no taller than a child, wearing what looked like miner's clothing from decades past. Leather cap, oil-stained jacket, boots that seemed too big for its feet. It was standing about 30 feet down the abandoned tunnel, holding something that looked like a tiny pickaxe. Just standing there, watching him. Doyle said he called out, "Hello? Who's there?" And the figure tilted its head like a dog hearing a strange sound. Then it turned and walked deeper into the tunnel. Didn't run, walked. And as it walked, Doyle heard the sound. Knock, knock, knock. 3 times, then silence. When Doyle went back the next day with 2 other miners, they found his tools. His pickaxe was 50 yards down the tunnel from where he'd dropped it. His water flask was hanging from a timber support 20 feet in the air. His lunch pail, empty, was sitting in the middle of the tunnel floor, its contents gone, the pail itself perfectly clean. Not a crumb, not a stain. No explanation for how any of it got there. Doyle refused to work that section again, said he'd quit before he went back. Mine boss Sullivan called it nerves and bad whiskey, moved Doyle to a different area, and that was the end of it, officially. Unofficially, the Cornish miners started leaving bigger crusts. November 1889. 3 separate crews, working different sections of the mine, all reported the same thing. Organized knocking sounds, Not the random creaks and pops of settling rock, not the percussion of distant picks. This was deliberate, rhythmic. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, like someone, something was trying to communicate. All 3 crews said the knocking came from the north section, the deepest part of the mine, where they were planning to open new chambers in the spring. The company brought in a geological surveyor. He spent 2 days down there with measuring equipment, listening devices, and the works. His official report said, thermal expansion and contraction of timber supports, exacerbated by temperature differential between worked and unworked sections. In other words, perfectly normal, nothing to worry about. But one of the surveyors, a young engineer named Robert Chen, added a note at the bottom of his report, a note that wasn't supposed to be there, that got him a stern talking to from his supervisor. The knocking occurs at precise intervals, 27 seconds between each set of 3 knocks, consistent across multiple observation periods. Thermal expansion does not exhibit such regularity. The source remains unidentified. 27 seconds. Remember that number. The Cornish miners, Evan Trelawney especially, said it wasn't rock settling, it was a warning. The knockers told them to stay out of the north section, that something down there didn't want to be disturbed. Sullivan's response, the knockers don't pay your wages, the coal company does. Back to work. February 1890, 1 month before the incident. This is when things started getting harder to explain away. Miners began reporting their lunch pails being opened. Not damaged, not torn apart the way rats would do it. Carefully opened. The latches undone, the lids lifted, the food removed with what almost looked like precision. The pails were always found in the same condition. Empty, clean, arranged in small circles or patterns on the tunnel floor. And here's what made it impossible to blame on rats. Krebs 11 was too deep for rats. No surface access except through the main shaft, and that was monitored constantly. Rats need easy access to the surface for food and water. They don't live 400 feet down in solid coal. So, what was eating the food? Evan Trelawney started leaving extra pasty crusts. Not just his own, he brought extra from home. His wife, Margaret, thought he'd lost his mind, baking 4 or 5 pasties a day when he only needed 1. But Evan insisted. Got to keep them satisfied, he said. Got to show respect. Other miners, Cornish ones mostly, but some Welsh and even a few Italians, started doing the same. You'd see them at the end of their shifts, leaving food in the corners of tunnels, in alcoves, in the small spaces between timber supports. Sullivan's response was predictable. Superstitious nonsense. You're feeding rats, nothing more. And you're wasting good food your families could be eating. Stop it. But they didn't stop. They couldn't, because the knocking was getting louder. March 1st, 1890, the day before it happened. Evan Trelawney didn't show up for work. This was unprecedented. Evan had worked at Krebs 11 for 6 years, never missed a shift, never called in sick, never caused trouble. He was one of Sullivan's most reliable men. When Sullivan went to Evan's house to find out what was wrong, he found Evan sitting on his porch, still in his sleeping clothes, staring at nothing. "I'm not going down," Evan said. "The hell you're not," Sullivan replied. "You're scheduled for the north section. We're opening the new chamber today." "The knockers have gone quiet," Evan said, his voice flat, dead. 3 weeks they've been knocking, regular as a heartbeat. Then yesterday, at noon shift, they stopped. Complete silence. So the noise stopped and you're refusing to work? Trelawney, that makes no damn sense. Evan finally looked at Sullivan, and Sullivan would later say to his wife in private, years after the mine was closed, that Evan's eyes looked haunted, like he'd already seen what was coming. When the knockers go quiet, Evan said, it means they've left. They only leave when something worse is coming, something they're afraid of. Sullivan threatened to fire him. Evan said he didn't care. They argued for 20 minutes before Evan finally, reluctantly, agreed to work. But he told Sullivan he wanted to work in the South Galleries, anywhere but the North section. Sullivan said no. The North section needed experienced men. Evan was one of the best. That was where he was going. That afternoon, Evan went down into the mine and left 3 complete pasties in the northwest corner of the North section. Not just crusts, whole pasties, beef, potato, turnip, lovingly wrapped by his wife. The other miners watched him do it. Nobody said anything. Even the ones who didn't believe in the knockers could feel it now. That sense of wrongness, of something waiting in the dark. March the 2nd, 1890, 6:45 a.m. Thomas Reese and his crew reached the North section. 12 men, 12 lunch pails, heading for the new chamber that was supposed to make them all a little richer when the coal proved good. The temperature was wrong. Should have been 58 degrees at that depth. The Earth's warmth trapped and concentrated. Instead, it was 52. Cold enough that their breath fogged in the lamplight. Cold enough that Thomas could feel it through his jacket, through his wool shirt, settling into his bones. His carbide lamp was flickering. He checked the carbide, full. Checked the water feed, working fine. But the flame kept sputtering, like it was struggling against some invisible wind, underground where there was no wind. "Is anyone else's lamp acting funny?" he called out. 5 other voices confirmed the same problem. Giovanni Marconi crossed himself, muttered something in Italian that sounded like a prayer. They pressed on. What else could they do? Sullivan was waiting for reports. The company was waiting for coal. Their families were waiting for wages. 7:30 a.m. Thomas found the lunch pails from yesterday's shift. All 12 of them left by the previous crew in their usual spots around the work area. Standard practice, day shift would collect them when they came up, return them to the men who had left them. But these pails were different. They were open, every single one. Lids carefully lifted, contents removed, and the remains, the few crumbs, the small bits of pasty crust, the dregs of tea, had been arranged in a perfect circle on the tunnel floor, 6 feet in diameter, precise as if measured with a compass. In the center of the circle, a small pile of coal dust, shaped into a symbol Thomas didn't recognize. It looked almost like a letter, but from no alphabet he knew. Angular, deliberate. "Boss," one of the younger miners said, his voice shaking. "What the hell is that?" Thomas knelt beside the circle, careful not to disturb it. The coal dust was fresh. You could tell by the way it still powdered at the touch. This has been done recently, maybe during the night shift, maybe earlier this morning, in the hour before they arrived. But the night shift swore nobody had been in this section, and they'd all come down together. So who? Evan's voice cut through his thoughts. "It's a warning!" Thomas looked up. Evan was staring at the symbol with an expression Thomas had never seen on the older man's face before. Fear. Pure, simple fear. "They're telling us to leave," Evan continued. This is their final warning. It's a prank, Thomas said, not believing it even as he said it. Someone from the night shift trying to spook us. Night shift doesn't know the old symbols, Evan said quietly. That's Cornish, old Cornish, from the tin mines. My grandfather showed me once. It means boundary. It means do not cross. 8:15 a.m. The knocking started again, but it wasn't like before. The three-knock pattern the crews had reported for weeks. That was gone. This was different, continuous, rhythmic, like a heartbeat if heartbeats came from beneath your feet. Boom, boom, boom. 27 seconds between each pulse. Thomas timed it by his pocket watch, exactly 27 seconds, not 26, not 28, precisely 27, and it was coming from below them, not from the walls or the ceiling, from underneath the coal seam they stood on. There's nothing under us, Giovanni said, his voice tight. The seam ends 20 feet down. Survey maps show solid rock below that, nothing to knock on. Boom, boom, boom. The sound was getting louder. 9 a.m. Giovanni reached for his lunch pail. He'd set it beside a water barrel when they first arrived, and his face went white. It's gone, he said. What's gone? My medal, my St. Barbara medal. I keep it in the top compartment. Always. It's not there. They searched. The medal wasn't in the pail, wasn't on the floor around the barrel, wasn't anywhere in the immediate work area. Then one of the men, William Davies, a quiet Welsh miner who rarely spoke, called out from 40 feet away at the mouth of an abandoned side tunnel. Found it! Thomas and Giovanni ran over. The tunnel had been sealed 6 months ago. Timbers nailed across the entrance. Condemned carved into the crossbeam. The seam in that direction had played out. Wasn't worth the effort to work it further. But the timbers are gone now. Not broken, not torn down. Removed. Stacked neatly to one side. The nails pulled cleanly, arranged in a pile like someone had taken the time to organize them. And 40 feet down that tunnel, lying in the middle of the floor, gleaming in the lamplight, Giovanni's St. Barbara medal. The knocking was coming from inside that tunnel. Boom, 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 louder now, close enough that Thomas could feel it in his chest. 9:30 a.m. Thomas made a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. As crew leader, he had a responsibility to investigate anything unusual. A sealed tunnel mysteriously opened with missing property inside. That needed to be checked. Could be thieves, could be men from another crew playing pranks, could be any number of rational explanations. Could be. Giovanni, William, Samuel, you're with me, Thomas said. Samuel Norton was a young English miner, barely 22, smart and steady. The rest of you stay here. If we're not back in 15 minutes, get out. Get to the cage. Understand? They understood. They didn't like it, but they understood. The 4 men entered the sealed tunnel, lamps held high. The temperature dropped immediately from 52 degrees to what felt like 45. Their breath came in clouds now, thick and white. The tunnel descended at a sharp angle, 45 degrees at least, steeper than any coal tunnel should be. Too steep to be safe, too steep to be regulated. And there was no record of this tunnel extending this deep. Thomas had studied the maps. This section should have been 20, maybe 30 feet before hitting the bottom of the seam. They'd gone 100 feet and were still descending. Thomas's lamp was behaving strangely. The flame, which should have pointed up, was pulling downward, towards the floor, toward the darkness ahead. That's not possible, Samuel whispered. Fire rises. "Everything about this is impossible," Thomas replied. At the 100-foot mark, the tunnel opened into a cavity, and Thomas's blood went cold. The cavity wasn't natural. It couldn't be. The walls were too smooth, too regular, perfect curves, like the inside of a bowl, carved from solid coal. No tool marks, no blast patterns, just smooth black stone. The cavity was roughly circular, maybe 20 feet across, and in the center, illuminated by their 4 lamps, lunch pails, dozens of them. They were arranged in a spiral pattern, starting at the outer edge and curling toward the center. All of them open, all of them empty, all of them are old. You could see the rust, the corrosion, the dents and damage of years underground. Thomas approached the nearest one, knelt, turned it to see the side, scratched into the tin, crude but legible. J. Harrison, 1876. The next one, M. Kelly, 1873. Another, P. Dawson, 1884. These were lunch pails from mines that had closed years ago, from incidents where men had disappeared. The dates matched. Thomas knew his mining history. He'd heard the stories of Wilkes-Barre in 73, the Paint Creek disappearances in 84. "Thomas," Giovanni said, his voice barely audible, "there's 47 of them." Thomas counted. Giovanni was right. Exactly 47 lunch pails, arranged in a perfect spiral. And in the very center, where the spiral ended, something moved. Samuel Norton, in his testimony later, testimony he would recant under pressure, then recant the recantation on his deathbed, described it like this: "They were small, maybe 2 feet, high, maybe less. I couldn't see them directly. Every time I tried to look straight at them, my eyes just slipped away. But in the corner of my vision, I could see them clearly. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, all moving together, like they were one thing instead of many. They wore clothing, but it was wrong. Too old, too worn, like it had been underground for decades, and they were taking the pails, picking them up, examining them, setting them back down. One of them looked at us. I know it looked at us, and its face, God help me, its face was coal, not covered in coal, made of coal, like someone had carved features into a lump of anthracite and somehow brought it to life. Thomas, in that moment, understood something that would haunt him until the day he died. They weren't warning miners of danger. They were the danger. "They're not warning us," Thomas said aloud. "They're collecting." One of the figures, larger than the others, wearing what looked like an ancient leather cap, pointed at them, and every figure in the cavity turned to look. "Run," Thomas said quietly. Then, louder, "Run!" They ran. Behind them, the sound of hundreds of small feet on stone. Rapid, relentless, getting closer. Giovanni looked back. Just a glance, just a second. He screamed, a sound Thomas had never heard a grown man make. Pure terror, stripped of everything human. But Giovanni kept running. They burst out of that tunnel at 9:52 a.m. into the main work area where the other 8 men were waiting. Thomas didn't slow down, didn't stop to explain. "Leave the lunch pails," he shouted. "Leave everything. Get to the cage now." The men didn't argue. They heard the sound behind Thomas's crew, that skittering, rushing sound of something pursuing. They heard Giovanni's sobs, saw the terror on Samuel's face. They ran, all 12 of them, racing through the tunnels, heading for the main shaft, for the cage, for the surface and sunlight and safety. Behind them, the north section was changing. 10:03 a.m. The men in the south section, working a chamber 300 yards from the north section, heard it. Or rather, they didn't hear it. 1 second, There was the normal sound of the mine, picks on coal, voices calling out, cartwheels on rails. The next second, silence, complete, absolute silence. Then a sound like a sigh, like the earth itself was exhaling. The men looked at each other in confusion. Then one of them, a Scottish miner named MacLeod, said, "Where's the north section?" They went to investigate, lamps held high. Where the entrance to the north section should have been, where 45 men had been working just minutes before, there was solid coal, smooth, unbroken, no tunnel, no opening, no sign that anything had ever been there. It was as if the earth had simply closed. No dust cloud from a collapse, no rumble of falling rock, no screams, just gone. When the mine inspector arrived 3 days later, he brought drilling equipment. They drilled where the north section entrance should have been. Solid coal. They drilled 20 feet deep. Solid coal. They brought in a geological surveyor with the latest mapping equipment. There was no void, no cavity, no tunnel. According to every instrument they had, there had never been anything there. But the mine maps said otherwise. The maps showed the north section clearly, 200 yards of tunnel, 4 work chambers, a complex network that had been producing coal for 2 years. Inspector William Crawford spent 2 weeks trying to make sense of it. In the end, his official report said, "Catastrophic tunnel collapse with complete burial of north section." But in the classified addendum, the part that wouldn't be unsealed for 30 years, he wrote something different. The disappearance cannot be explained by known geological or mining phenomena. The testimony of survivors, while consistent, describes events incompatible with physical law. The physical evidence suggests that the north section did not collapse but rather ceased to exist. I find no precedent for such an occurrence in mining history and can offer no rational explanation. The mine was abandoned 3 days later. Too dangerous, the company said, structurally unsound. The real reason, whispered among the miners who'd worked there, the knockers had taken their due, and when the knockers took something, it stayed taken. The 45 lunch pails in the recorder's office are all that remain of those men. Every single one is empty, and on cold nights, when the archive is quiet, the night watchman says you can still hear it. Faint but unmistakable. Knock, knock, knock. 27 seconds of silence. Then again, knock, knock, knock. The knockers are patient, you see. They're always patient, and they're still collecting. Captain Henry Morrison had seen every kind of mining disaster there was to see. In 23 years, leading rescue operations across Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and now Indian Territory, he'd pulled men from collapsed tunnels, dug through gas-choked chambers, and recovered bodies from flooded shafts. He'd seen things that would break a softer man. Fathers and sons crushed together, men suffocated inches from safety, the aftermath of explosions that turned human beings into something unrecognizable. But he'd never seen anything like Krebs Mine Number 11. Morrison and his team from the neighboring Krebs Number 9 arrived 4 hours after the incident. Standard disaster protocol: locate the collapse point, assess structural integrity, begin rescue operations. Every minute mattered. Men could survive for days in air pockets if you got to them fast enough. Except there was no collapse to locate. Morrison's official report, filed March 3, 1890, contained language he'd never used in his entire career. proceeded to the last known location of the north section entry point per mine maps and testimony of survivors, found a solid coal face where the tunnel entrance should be located. No debris field, no disturbed earth, no indication whatsoever of structural collapse. Coal face appears undisturbed, showing normal striation and bedding planes consistent with unmined seam. Assessment. Based on physical evidence alone, it appears impossible that a tunnel ever existed at this location. He wrote that last sentence 3 times before he let it stand. Each time, his hand shook a little more. The problem was the maps. Morrison brought the original mine survey documents, approved by the Territorial Mining Authority, signed by 3 separate engineers, dated and stamped. They showed the north section clear as day. 200 yards of primary tunnel, 4 work chambers branching off, all meticulously measured and documented. They brought the original surveyor back down. His name was Jacob Winters, and he'd mapped Krebs 11 when it first opened in 1884. He stood at what should have been the entrance to the north section, comparing his maps to the solid wall of coal in front of him, and his face went gray. "This is impossible," he said, his voice flat. "I walked through that tunnel by myself. I measured it with a chain and compass. I mapped every chamber." He put his hand on the coal face as if touching it would make it disappear. "This tunnel existed. I stake my professional reputation on it." Morrison believed him because Morrison had been in that tunnel too. 3 weeks ago, I checked timber supports during a routine safety inspection. He'd walked those 200 yards, examined those chambers, filed a report saying everything was structurally sound. Now there was nothing, just coal, 300-million-year-old coal that looked like it had never been touched by human hands. "Get the drill," Morrison finally said. They drilled 20 feet, deep, straight into where the tunnel should have been. The core samples came back solid coal, compressed over eons, showing no evidence of recent disturbance. The geologist on Morrison's team said it would take thousands of years for coal to reform like that after being excavated. They'd been in that tunnel 3 weeks ago. The survivors were interviewed separately on March 3rd and 4th in the company office. 4 men, Thomas Reese, Giovanni Marconi, William Davies, Samuel Norton, the only witnesses to what had happened in that cavity, the only ones who might be able to explain where 45 men had gone. Thomas was interviewed first. Inspector William Crawford, sent from the U.S. Geological Survey specifically for this case, took detailed notes in a leather-bound journal that's now stored in the National Archives. Thomas's account was coherent, disturbingly so. He described everything methodically: the cold, the opened lunch pails, the symbol made from coal dust, the unsealed tunnel, the cavity, the ancient lunch pails arranged in a spiral, and the figures. "Small," Thomas said, "maybe 2 feet tall. Couldn't see them straight on, only in peripheral vision. But they were there, dozens of them, maybe more, moving around those lunch pails like they were cataloging them, collecting them." Crawford's pen scratched across the page. Then he looked up. "Mr. Reese, I need you to understand something. I'm required to file a report on this incident. That report will be read by federal authorities, by the territorial governor, by people who will make decisions about mine safety across the entire territory. So, I need to ask you, are you certain about what you saw?" Thomas met his eyes. "I've been mining for 16 years, Inspector. I've survived 2 collapses. I know the difference between reality and panic. I know what gas exposure feels like, what it does to your mind. This wasn't that. What I saw in that cavity was real. And I know how that sounds. I know what you're thinking, but I'm telling you the truth. Crawford's note in the margin: witness appears rational, but claims events outside physical possibility. Giovanni Marconi was interviewed next, and he was in worse shape. His hands trembled. His eyes were red from crying or lack of sleep, or both. He kept touching his chest where his St. Barbara medal used to hang. "What did you see when you looked back?" Crawford asked. "In the tunnel, when you were running. Mr. Reese says you looked back and screamed." Giovanni's face contorted. "Non posso! I cannot. Mr. Marconi, please, I need to know what you saw." "They were taking them," Giovanni burst out. "The men who disappeared. They were taking them below, further down, into the earth. I saw them carrying—" He stopped, hands over his face. "I saw hands, so many small hands, pulling them down into cracks in the floor that should not exist, taking them somewhere deeper." "Who were they?" Crawford pressed. "What were they?" Giovanni looked up and his eyes were wild. "The old ones, the ones who were here first, before us, before the mines, before everything. We thought we were digging into the earth, but we were digging into their earth, and they took back what we stole." Crawford's note: possible hysteria, recommend medical evaluation. But privately, in his personal journal, discovered after his death in 1923, Crawford wrote something different. Marconi's terror is genuine. Whatever he saw has broken something in him. This is not the behavior of a man inventing stories. William Davies confirmed Thomas and Giovanni's account, but added a detail that made Crawford's blood run cold. "I heard them," Davies said, "in that cavity. While we were standing there, looking at those lunch pails, I heard voices. Not English, not Italian or Welsh or any language I know. It sounded like rocks grinding together, but organized, like it was a speech, like they were talking." "What were they saying?" "I don't know, but it sounded old, ancient, like a language from before there were words." Samuel Norton's testimony was the most detailed and the most damning. He'd kept his wits about him in the cavity, had the presence of mind to read the names scratched into those ancient lunch pails. "J. Harrison, 1876, Samuel recited from memory. M. Kelly, 1873. P. Dawson, 1884. I recognize those names, Inspector. They're from the records. Missing miners from other incidents. Wilkes Barre in 73, 8 men vanished. Krebs Number 7 in 76, 12 men. Paint Creek in 84, 11 men." Crawford did the math. 8 plus 12 plus 11 equaled 31. Add the 45 from this incident, that was 76 lunch pails total. But Samuel said there were only 47 pails in the cavity, so where were the other 29? And what did it mean that they were still collecting? "The pails were empty," Samuel continued, "but not eaten from. The food wasn't consumed, it was just gone. No crumbs, no residue, no signs of rats or animals, like the food had simply ceased to exist." Crawford's pen paused over the page. He looked at Samuel for a long moment. "Are you willing to testify to this under oath?" Samuel nodded. "Every word is true." That was March 4th, Samuel's first interview, his last honest one. The Osage Coal and Mining Company issued their statement the same day. Gas explosion in the north section. Catastrophic collapse. All rescue efforts were exhausted. The men were gone. Tragic, but these things happened in mining. The problem was there was no evidence of of an explosion. No burn marks, no blast damage, no elevated gas readings, no debris field. Morrison's rescue team had documented everything, and their report contradicted the company's statement, point by point. But the company had lawyers, and the lawyers explained very patiently why the official story had to be gas explosion. Insurance didn't cover unexplained disappearance. It covered natural disasters. Gas explosions were natural disasters. Therefore, if the company wanted to pay the families, and they did want to pay the families out of the goodness of their corporate hearts, the cause of death needed to be something insurance would recognize. Also, death certificates. You couldn't issue a death certificate for vanished into an impossible cavity. You needed a cause. An explosion provided a cause. Also, liability. If the disappearance was unexplained, that suggested the company didn't understand their own mine. That suggested incompetence. That suggested other mines might have similar problems. That suggested lawsuits, investigations, regulatory oversight. Much simpler if it was an explosion. Acts of God were nobody's fault. Inspector Crawford arrived March 6th, 4 days after the incident. He was a U.S. Geological Survey, 20 years experience, known for his thorough and skeptical approach to mining disasters. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses or anything that couldn't be measured with instruments. He spent 2 weeks at Krebs 11 and left believing his instruments might not measure everything that mattered. His scientific analysis was exhaustive. Gas samples from every section of the mine, all normal. Seismic testing for earth movement, nothing. Structural assessment of remaining tunnels, sound. Core samples from where the north section should have been. Solid coal, undisturbed, ancient. He interviewed the mine boss, James Sullivan, 3 times. The first 2 interviews, Sullivan stuck to the script. No unusual activity, no warnings, completely unexpected disaster. In the 3rd interview, Crawford got him alone. No lawyers, no company men, just 2 professionals talking about something neither wanted to acknowledge. They'd been complaining for months, Sullivan finally admitted. The noises, the knocking, tools going missing, lunch pails being opened. I thought it was a prank. Thought it was new men trying to spook the veterans. Or rats maybe, though I couldn't figure out how rats got that deep. Did you investigate? Of course I investigated. Found nothing, just disturbed pails, opened latches, food gone. Sullivan's hands clenched. And that sound. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. 27 seconds between each set, regular as a heartbeat. The Cornish miners said it was the Tommy knockers. Sullivan laughed, but there was no humor in it. The Cornish miners say a lot of things, old superstitions. I thought I needed production numbers, Inspector. The company was watching my output. I couldn't shut down a profitable mine because men were hearing noises. And now? Sullivan looked at him with haunted eyes. Now I've got 45 men gone and no bodies to bury. Now I've got widows asking me where their husbands are, and I can't tell them because I don't know. Now I've got a tunnel that shouldn't exist erased from reality, like it was never there. His voice dropped to a whisper. What do I put in? My report, Inspector? What should I tell those families? Crawford didn't have an answer. The second round of interviews started March 12th. By then, the survivors had been visited. The company had made certain offers. The territorial authorities had made certain suggestions. The families of the missing men had made certain pleas. We need closure. We need death certificates. We need to move on. Thomas recanted, said he must have been confused by gas exposure, said his memory was unclear, said he might have imagined the cavity, the figures, all of it. Crawford's note, witness coached, original testimony is more credible. William Davies and Samuel Norton recanted too. Both now claimed mass hallucination from methane. Both coincidentally received job offers at mines in other territories. Both left Oklahoma within the month. Only Giovanni refused to change his story. "I will not lie," he said, his voice shaking with fury, "about what took my friends. Something evil lives under this mountain. We woke up, we disturbed it, and it took them. I saw it. I will not say I didn't." They removed him from the witness list, marked his testimony as unreliable due to mental distress. Catherine Reese refused the company's compensation. She demanded her husband's lunch pail back, the one he'd been carrying that morning, the one with her pasty still inside. They gave it to her. She opened it in the company office, with witnesses present. The pasty was gone, the pail was empty, and the metal was cold, so cold that frost formed on it, despite the office being 70 degrees. One of the company clerks touched it and yanked his hand back, swearing. "It's ice," he said. "That metal is ice cold." Catherine took the pail home, kept it on her kitchen table. It stayed cold, never warmed up, even when she left it near the stove, even when she wrapped it in blankets. Forever cold, like it was still 400 feet underground. Crawford filed his official report March 18th. The conclusion: catastrophic tunnel collapse, complete burial of workforce, recovery impossible due to structural instability, recommend permanent closure. But he also filed a classified addendum, sealed by order of the territorial governor. The physical evidence contradicts all known geological principles. 45 men cannot vanish into solid rock that shows no disturbance. The consistency of witness testimony, despite obvious pressure to recant, suggests genuine experience of extraordinary event. The pre-existing folklore regarding Tommy knockers may represent historical pattern of similar incidents at other sites. Recommend investigation of mining folklore in regions with unexplained disappearances. This investigator cannot, in good conscience, declare these deaths accidental, as that would imply understanding of cause. We do not understand the cause. We may never understand the cause. The report was sealed for 30 years, because what else could they do? Admit the government couldn't explain it? Admit they couldn't protect workers from something they didn't understand? Tell families their loved ones had been taken by something that shouldn't exist? Better to seal it. Let time pass. Let memory fade. Let it become a ghost story rather than a documented fact. 3 months later, Thomas Reese was found dead in his home. Laudanum overdose. Official ruling, suicide. He left a note. Catherine showed it to one friend before burning it. The friend later recalled what it said. "They're still knocking, every night, getting closer. They want me to come back down. They want to finish collecting. I can't let them. I'm sorry." Giovanni Marconi left for California, worked surface mines only, never went underground again. He told his children, "The earth is older than us. There are things below that were here first. We borrowed space from them, and some of us didn't pay proper respect. Remember that. Remember and stay above ground." His St. Barbara medal was never found. He died in 1934 at 72 and was buried with a new one. The mine was sealed March 20th, 1890. They poured concrete down the main shaft until it was filled. sold the land to the railroad. No mining ever resumed in that seam, though the coal was rich and plentiful. The 45 lunch pails remained in the recorder's office, later moved to the Oklahoma Historical Society. Catherine Reese had demanded they be kept as evidence. Evidence of what exactly was never specified. They sit there still in a locked storage room, untouched for 135 years. Every pail is empty. And some nights, when the archive is quiet and the staff has gone home, the night watchman says you can hear it. Knock, knock, knock. Coming from inside the pails. 27 seconds of silence. Then again. Knock, knock, knock. Patient, persistent, eternal. Still collecting. Always collecting. 30 years is exactly one generation. Long enough for witnesses to die, for memories to fade, for painful truths to become comfortable legends. It's also the standard period for sealing controversial government documents, a practice designed not to hide the truth forever, but to let enough time pass that the truth can't hurt anyone anymore. In 1920, when Inspector William Crawford's sealed report on the Krebs Mine Number 11 incident was finally opened to the public, most of the people involved were dead. Thomas Reese had been gone for 27 years. Giovanni Marconi was in California, old and broken. The Osage Coal and Mining Company had dissolved in 1903. The territorial government that had sealed the report no longer existed. Oklahoma had become a state in 1907. Time, as they say, heals all wounds, or at least makes them irrelevant. But for Dr. Eleanor Vance, a historian at the University of Oklahoma researching mining disasters for safety reform advocacy, Crawford's report opened a wound she couldn't close. Her personal journal, discovered after her death in 1951, contains entries from the weeks after she first read that sealed addendum. March 15, 1920. This cannot be accurate, yet Crawford's reputation was impeccable. 20 years with the Geological Survey, dozens of disaster investigations, never a hint of sensationalism or unreliability. Why would he fabricate something so outlandish? March 22, 1920. I have now read the survivor testimonies 3 times. The consistency of the impossible details troubles me more than the supernatural claims themselves. 4 men, interviewed separately, describing identical phenomena. Either they collaborated on a shared delusion or what? What am I supposed to conclude? April the 3rd, 1920. Something happened at Krebs 11. That much is undeniable. 45 men vanished. But what? She spent the next year trying to answer that question, and what she found made it worse. The disappearances at Krebs weren't unique. They weren't even unusual. Dr. Vance documented similar incidents across every major coal mining region in America. The pattern was always the same. Miners vanishing from deep sections, tunnels found sealed or missing entirely, lunch pails recovered empty, no bodies found. 1873, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. 8 miners entered a section of the mine that was being evaluated for closure. They never came back. When rescue teams arrived, they found the entrance to that section blocked by what the report called natural rock formation, solid coal where the tunnel should have been. The miners' lunch pails were found in the surface office, all empty. Official cause: burial in shaft collapse, bodies unrecoverable. 1884, Paint Creek, West Virginia. 11 men disappeared while working in what miners called old workings, abandoned sections from earlier mining operations. When searchers went looking, They found the old workings had been bricked up. Not with mine company, bricks, ancient brickwork, so old the mortar had turned to powder. No record of who had sealed those tunnels or when. The lunch pails were found on the surface, empty. 1902, Fratterville, Tennessee. This one was different because there was an actual explosion. Coal dust ignition killed 216 men, bodies recovered and identified, except for 14 men who'd been working the north section. That section didn't explode. It just wasn't there anymore when rescuers arrived. 202 bodies accounted for, 14 missing, 14 lunch pails found on the surface, all empty. The pattern held across 30 years and 6 states. And everywhere the disappearances occurred, there was one consistent detail in the historical record. Cornish miners had worked there. Cornish miners who believed in the Tommy knockers. Dr. Vance wrote in her journal, "The folklore doesn't follow the disappearances. The disappearances follow the folklore." As if the legends weren't invented to explain the events, but to warn of them. She tried to find rational explanations. God knows she tried. Theory 1, gas hallucinations. Methane or carbon monoxide could cause shared delusions, make men see things that weren't there. But that didn't explain the physical evidence. The sealed tunnels, the missing food, the cold lunch pails. It didn't explain how multiple incidents across different states showed identical details. And Crawford's report specifically noted that gas levels at Krebs 11 were tested and found normal. Theory 2, undocumented cave systems. Maybe the miners broke through into natural cavities, fell into underground rivers or chasms, and the companies covered it up to avoid liability. But geological surveys showed no voids in any of the affected areas, and bodies falling into water would eventually surface. None ever did. Theory 3, mass murder and cover-up. Maybe the mining companies killed workers during labor disputes and invented supernatural stories to hide it. But there were no labor disputes at any of these mines. Krebs 11 was profitable and the workers well paid by 1890 standards. The companies had no motive. And there were too many witnesses. You can't keep a mass murder quiet with that many people involved. Every rational explanation failed. In 1921, Dr. Vance published a paper titled Unexplained Disappearances in American Mining, 1870-1920. The academic response was brutal. Reviewers called it unscientific, credulous, an embarrassment to serious scholarship. One wrote, "Dr. Vance has confused folklore with fact and produced a work more suitable for penny dreadfuls than academic journals." But in her conclusion, she wrote something that would haunt mining historians for decades. "I cannot explain these incidents through geology, chemistry, or psychology. The witnesses were credible. The evidence is documented. The pattern is undeniable. I am forced to conclude that something exists in deep mining environments that we do not understand. Perhaps the folklore, the beliefs in Tommy knockers, mine spirits, subterranean entities, represents humanity's oldest warning system about things that predate us. Perhaps these stories survived because the people who heeded them survived." She spent the next 25 years studying the phenomenon. In 1945, months before her death, she made her final journal entry, "I am no closer to the truth than I was in 1920. But I know this, the miners who believed in the Tommy knockers, who left offerings, who followed the old superstitions, they lived longer than those who didn't. Perhaps belief isn't about truth. Perhaps it's about survival. Perhaps some doors should stay closed. Perhaps some questions shouldn't be asked. I have asked them. I cannot answer them, and I think that's the most honest thing I can say. Today, the land where Krebs Mine Number 11 once stood sits in the Oklahoma countryside near McAllister. There's no marker, no memorial, nothing to indicate that 45 men vanished there in 1890. The land is privately owned. The owner, a third-generation local, refuses all interview requests, but everyone in the area knows the stories. Don't dig on that land, they say. Nothing good comes from digging there. The 45 lunch pails are in storage at the Oklahoma Historical Society. They're not on display. The official reason is inappropriate for family audiences. The real reason, found in a curator's private notes from 1987, is different. Multiple volunteers refuse to handle these items. All report feeling watched. All describe the sensation of cold even when wearing gloves. Recommend keeping them in locked storage. Thomas Reese's lunch pail sits in a climate-controlled box. Catalog number OKHS 1890, Mining 047. The archival notes say, handle shows where consistent with daily use. The interior shows no residue. The object remains inexplicably cold despite room temperature storage. Catherine Reese never remarried. She kept her husband's lunch pail on her kitchen table until the day she died in 1937. Her granddaughter was with her at the end. Catherine's last words whispered with her final breath, "They're still down there, all of them, waiting." Giovanni Marconi's great-grandson Michael was interviewed in 2015 for a documentary about Oklahoma mining history. He shared a family story that had been passed down for 4 generations. "My great-grandfather never stopped leaving food out, even after he moved to California. Even when he was working surface mines, he'd take a piece of his lunch every day and leave it on the ground in a specific pattern. My grandfather asked him why once. He said, 'To keep them satisfied so they don't come up.' And here's the thing that should trouble you. The incidents haven't stopped. Between 2010 and 2023, there have been 3 reported incidents near the old Krebs location. Small-time hobby miners, legal surface operations, nothing deep. 2012, 3 miners reported knocking sounds coming from an abandoned shaft. They left immediately and never came back. 2018, a mining crew found their equipment disassembled one morning, the parts arranged in a perfect circle around their excavation site. They abandoned the operation. 2023, a single miner working a small claim reported seeing a small figure in old-fashioned mining clothes in his peripheral vision. He packed up that same day and sold the mineral rights at a loss. All 3 incidents occurred within a 2-mile radius of where Krebs 11 once stood. The miners all said the same thing. It felt wrong, like we weren't wanted there. So, what were they? The Tommy knockers, the small figures, the things that took 45 men and left nothing but empty lunch pails. Ancient spirits guarding the deep places. Unknown subterranean species humanity has never properly documented. Mass hallucinations somehow passed down through generations, or something we simply lack the framework to understand, the way a medieval peasant lacked the framework to understand electricity or radiation. We don't know, and maybe that's the point. In mining communities across Appalachia and the West, older miners still observe certain rituals. They tap their lunch pails 3 times before opening them. They leave a bite of their sandwich in the corner of their work area. They never, ever whistle underground. When asked why, most shrug and say it's a habit, tradition. something their fathers taught them. But some, the ones whose grandfathers worked the deep seams, who know the old stories, who remember, say something different. They say, because some things were here before us, they'll be here after. And as long as we respect that, as long as we pay the old tribute, they let us take what we need from their domain. But if you forget, if you take too much, dig too deep, ignore the warnings, well, the earth has a long memory, and the things that live in it are patient. Catherine Reese made that pasty on March 2nd, 1890, before dawn. Beef, potato, turnip, wrapped in lard crust pastry. She crimped the edge with her fingers and carved her initials in the corner, C.R., so Thomas would know it was made by her hands, with her care, with her love. He was supposed to eat it at noon, 400 feet underground, sitting with his crew during their break. Then he'd come home at evening, kiss her and their daughter, wash the coal dust from his hands, and sleep. She waited for him to come home. He never did. Thomas Reese's lunch pail is still cold to the touch.